Track back to 2019, a year coming off of the triumphant success of Forsaken, fans celebrating the success of Bungie, and even more players from all around gaming checking out Destiny 2. Because of no more Activision, and the chance to play the entire Red War, the entire Curse of Osiris, and Warmind completely for free, to get a taste of what that one friend was always telling them about Destiny. In 2019, the player base received Shadowkeep with the Return to the Moon, the story of a pyramid on the moon, and for some reason the Black Garden. Within the Black Garden came a raid, and within that raid came a quest for the exotic of today's video. Now this exotic has become a necessary portion of every player's loadout, and for better or worse, has shifted the game to always need it in some capacity. Recently, the 3-time back-to-back-to-back world's first raider, Saltagreppo, even went out to say his opinions on this exotic for some friendly conversation. And in Destiny community fashion, it got out of hand quickly. So, ladies and gentlemen, everybody in between, we are going on an adventure to discover the exotic Divinity, the best and worst exotic of all time. The Destiny player dilemma was always saying the game is so good to some friends, just for the same friends to start playing when the game was inevitably going to be bad. Shadowkeep is probably the best example of this next to vanilla Destiny 2, because while Forsaken crushed all the expectations, I think Shadowkeep flew a little too close to the sun. The changes made that will 100% impact today's video are Armor 2.0 systems, enabling mods to be slotted instead of rolled for, the Nightfall tier system where Master Nightfalls were made available, the season pass, where you could gain loot and amenities for doing bounties, the new upgrade materials, armor exotic farming, and finally, champions. Now it sounds like a lot of change was made, and to me, this is what makes Destiny DLCs, the massive updates that pivot the game. But players weren't sold on this completely yet. Sure, most sandbox changes were made, but the identity of Destiny was inevitably changing, and with a shallow campaign with a teaser ending and not much in the way of new content, it's not hard to see why players dismissed Shadowkeep. Its seasons may have been filled with more content than the current seasons players get, but at release, it's not hard to see why players weren't sold. It would be different if Shadowkeep didn't come off of one of the largest years of content for Destiny, but it did. And with this also came a raid on that very same Friday, the Garden of Salvation. The garden looked to not only add something new to the table with its setting for a raid, but a quest that would completely shift the game's meta and still does today. We've covered the story of Garden, but we haven't covered the story of its raid exotic, the last one to have a quest. Garden of Salvation I coined as the raid to shock the community, but it's not exactly in the best way. Again, just like the rest of Shadowkeep's DLC, Garden suffered from being the next one up after Forsaken, and it would be the only raid for that entire year, especially after Forsaken had 3 raids and Garden's quality just wasn't up to par with the others. Nowadays, I think Garden has become better, but that's because there's way more to play. The Divinity quest involved having the player kill some specific enemies, interact with some specific cubes, and then re-enter the raid. The puzzle steps were something really special though, with the player needing to be tethered to each other to complete different steps. It was a chase through different channels via raid secrets, via Twitch streams, and more. I love when Bungie dedicates this much to a quest. I think it makes the game feel more alive than just buying exotics from a kiosk, and Divinity felt this wholeheartedly, having players operate as a unit to solve puzzles. These puzzles were there from the start, with an activation and a tether between the boxed rooms on both sides. If the tether didn't break 99% of the time. Next one up was after the first encounter, on the right side of the jumping puzzle, and, well, I mean, just have a listen.
The area you drop into is the end of the chain, and as you walk through, you'll assign people to the following spots. You're going to activate it, make sure everyone is within proper line of sight of each other, and then you will unlock this puzzle. The wall breaks down here, and you can escape this area by taking the route player 6 took to get to their position, back outside, and then climbing up the wall to progress.
The next one was after the Harpy boss fight, with probably the most precise direction needed.
All 6 people are tethered, players 1 and 6 will also link themselves together, and then you can all move as a group in a blob. The way my team did it was by making a circle of people and carefully jumping over the pillar to make a ring around it.
After that was this one, where you needed to tether together, then beeline it to the correct orientation. If not,
You die.
to the harpies. The final area was inside of the waterfall, where you just needed to connect a long chain. Then came Garden Says, where you needed to be fast in a 6-player sequence to complete it. And oh man, the amount of times people have messed this one up, aka my dumbass. After that, just beat the raid, then Divinity was now yours. Now, what does this exotic do? Well, Divinity is an arc trace rifle with the perk Judgment, which says that sustained damage with this weapon envelops the target in a field that weakens and disrupts them. It's also strong against overload champions. Divinity applies an auto crit. All weapons crit whenever they hit an enemy affected by Divinity. There's a 25% bonus damage on top of the auto crit for that debuff. It takes 1 second to apply the debuff. The debuff lingers for 1.5 seconds, shooting at all extends this as well, and the debuff will fade after 1.5 seconds if not being shot for at least 1 second of the beam time. Divinity does stack with some other buffs in the game as well. And with the perk Penance, the other perk that allows a burst of damage while holding Div, it procs after 4.5 seconds of firing. Penance is worth about 42% of Divinity's DPS. So you can spam fire to proc Penance, then keep the other buffs up while consuming less ammo. One full mag procs Penance 3 times over. One thing that nobody ever talks about, and I'm here to discuss, is that Divinity is just a better Cold Heart. Cold Heart's perk is called Cold Fusion, which means that this weapon shoots a steady Cold Fusion powered arc laser, dealing more damage the longer it remains on a target. Now Divinity applies a crit point and a debuff on enemies for you and your teammates while you're holding the beam, while Cold Heart gives the exact same benefits, but only to the person wielding it. Bungie, it's time to free Cold Heart, let it go in the wild, or update it in some way, or give it the old George to Lenny treatment. I don't even think people read that book anymore. Divinity has 4 elements that make it strong, so we'll go weakest to strongest here. The weakest is that it's an arc trace rifle. The next one up is that it has overload rounds, meaning that Bungie's overload champions in the game could be stunned instantly by this exotic. And seeing what's typically used as the overload champions, captains, minotaurs, taken hobgoblins, and chieftains, these are typically the most aggressive enemy type, and Divinity instantly stuns them. The next one on the list is the fact that Divinity gives that debuff that stacks with other things. Except for weird bosses that we've gone over before, like Kali, Ashladoon, and others. That's why you'll see World's First Team saying things like, oh, Div works on this boss.
Div's also 69. You can shoot Div. You can shoot Div.
It's all just a test. Finally, and of course the best portion of Divinity, is that bubble that makes it a crit spot, meaning that your team doesn't have to hit headshots, they just need to hit the bubble. So why was Divinity created? As Dado highlighted in his video on the topic, Bungie had to have known that Divinity was going to be a part of a team's loadout for everything. In my opinion, Div was created for a few reasons. Bungie had free-to-play introduced that year, and Divinity is a laser that applies a bubble to bosses. What better way to have a veteran of the raid teach a new player Destiny than shooting a laser to direct their eyes to a boss for damage? The same way dropping a well does for knowing where to stand for damage, Divinity is an eye vector to most. This year also introduced champions, and Divinity made it more accessible. Finally, with the sandbox changes to reduce players' power after Forsaken, what better way to bring it back than Divinity? Especially on a mobile and floating boss with a tougher than normal crit like Sanctified Mind. Overall, in my 8 years of playing Destiny, it seems like every single time there's some sort of change that feels like it's going to make the game harder or more meaningful to chase the loot, there's always something to supplement it to make it easier. This isn't me shitting on the game, it's just a fact. And that's especially the case for these champions. Since most of these have a pretty tough crit spot, Divinity has completely nullified that. Divinity would quickly make its home in everyone's loadout, and normally I'd show a montage of players using it, but it's more of a utility for one player a part of your team than a weapon to be enjoyed. But I know there's some Div enjoyers at home, So here's a budget montage.
I wanna see the big fucking bubble, bro!
Big bubble.
Divinity would go on to be a part of every single day one clear, every single raid clear practically, every single activity in the game, every single facet of the game. I can't think of a time in Destiny 2 since Divinity released where it has not been used, and there's a need for it now more than ever. If you think about the times when it was introduced, there was a few enemies that were a pain to kill, but most were able to be fried with or without it. Now that this exotic has skewed the playing field so much, and how with Armor 2.0, everybody can build into it and around it, it feels as if Bungie had to make designs on bosses in the game catered to this weapon. I want to be fair to a lot of you that play on controllers, since the range of motion isn't as forgiving as mouse and keyboard. Divinity helps a lot for the kills, especially on moving bosses like Rolk. Without Divinity on Rolk, it's much harder, and on day one, I'd imagine not having Divinity would have made the number of clears move down a lot. So when a simple friendly thread by saltagreppo, one of the top players in the game, discussing Divinity's use and need for a tweak was made, players had a visceral reaction. Before we go forward, I want to know if you think Divinity needs a nerf. Does it need a tweak? Leave me a comment now and see if your opinion changes after this video. Salt's thread started by simply introducing the idea that Divinity was always needed for every single raid boss and every single strike in the game practically. Then going into it, removing most of the skill gap during DPS and making precision weapons way too easy to use. However, how it forces high risk, high reward weapons such as Whisper of the Worm out of the meta completely, since they simply can't be buffed. Otherwise, it would be a great option due to Div being a non-factor. Now, Salt didn't want to remove the gun or its identity because that is Divinity. Without the components to it, it's just not the same gun. So he suggested some ideas for friendly discussion. And wow, if you needed a reason to stay away from the Bird app, people started using their Twitter fingers to call him all kinds of things.
Oh, apparently I missed yet another latest discussion about nerfing Divinity. You don't need it. You don't have to use it. Let people use what they want. Stop trying to nerf everything just because you're the top 0.00001% of players. Like, come on.
Daily reminder why saltagreppo should never be taken seriously. TLDR, nerf Divinity because it's doing its intended job, aka what it was introduced into the game for.
Well, goddammit, let me do my normal raid in peace. Not everyone can play this game daily and unlock the meta guns and mods. Do your high-end content and stop crapping on the people that can only play once or twice a week and just want to do a raid because it doesn't take 5 hours. Just give it over, saltagreppo. Just get out of your house, go to work, do some overtime. Stop taking the game so serious if you want to ruin it for casuals. This spiraled out of control, and quickly the entire community of Destiny players were at each other's throats like they were starving cats, and there was only one can of tuna to chase. Bungie's social media manager, Griffin Bennett, even went on to say that he was really disappointed by the reactions of players to a well thought out opinion, and how players can share respectful thoughts without the fear of an attack. Destiny has a history of great community moments, and many more that we still have yet to share. But just like any community, there is also some people that are unhappy at any form of change to the game. I'm here to present the facts, then sprinkle on some opinion. But there's always been a problem with any fan base of anything, that there's a toxic negativity that always hates whatever a game tries, and a toxic positivity where nothing can change and everything is perfect. And unfortunately, a toxic positivity of this exotic doing no wrong came to bat. There's a reason I stray away from diving into feedback for the game myself. The backlash is unreal, and the last time I did, I was attacked at full speed because I said the well was a little bit too powerful. And then I was told apparently Bungie only listens to content creators and to shut up and stay in my lane. It's still the best super in the game 2 years after that video. One day I do plan on making a video that brings the facts if Bungie listens to only content creators or not, because I see that one floating around all over too. I don't know though, so let me know if you're interested in that in the comments. There was a lot of backlash, and a lot of creators also chimed in.
This game has become so damn easy, so damn casual, so damn watered down. The only way we can challenge ourselves is by at least making a first-person shooter require some level of aiming, and Divinity removes that. Why? This is a big-ass bubble. Who can't hit that?
I don't think Salt's a bad guy. I'm pretty with his take there. Like, I agree pretty heavily. I don't necessarily agree with the way he wants to fix it. I think the way that I explained would be a little bit better for both sides.
If it changed, I don't think I'd be upset. If it didn't change, I also don't think I'd be very upset. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing Divinity get reworked. Like I said, Divinity never got reworked. I wouldn't care. You know, that's the biggest thing. I think that people, you know, can care either way, whether you want Divinity, you know, changed or not. But it only becomes an issue when people start, you know, coming at people in either direction. It's like, it's really not that serious, you know?
Through the shitstorm, there were some good suggestions, however, and I reached out to Salt himself to see what he had compiled as a list of good suggestions. He said that, quote, "The whole point is that a gun that is the easiest option shouldn't also be the best option. A solution that would be easier to understand than what I suggested in the post would be to make bosses affected by Div have a lower crit multiplier, both shooting the bubble or the actual crit. It achieves the same result as my post, but it's easier to understand." I also had some people suggest some creative but unrealistic things from a dev standpoint. Solutions like making the boss have targets to hit on their body to apply the debuff if everything is reached. Ultimately, just removing the debuff would be a nice change. Not enough, since people wouldn't stop using div on most bosses, but they would instead use both debuffs and div for consistency. But this would probably be the easiest solution overall. I really don't think there's any need for any crazy rework to make div more skilled or anything. All those suggestions are trying to find a way to keep it meta. In my opinion, there is nothing wrong with it existing in the meta for most situations. At least for good teams, div had its time to shine. Divinity may be the biggest influence to every build in Destiny 2, meaning in some form, eventually Bungie will have to look at the cards for a change. And personally, I'm for that. For these suggestions, it wouldn't affect bosses like War Priest and Rolk. They just make another step or two to achieve the same damage glory. I think one thing nobody is talking about is what we discussed at the beginning of this video, the quest. Divinity isn't an easy exotic to obtain for a lot of players. It takes a whole raid clear and a lot of extra steps in that raid. So you know what? Next time I'm live on Twitch, aka today or tomorrow, or when most of you see this, we're just gonna do Divinity helps. Why not? Let's help everybody get Divinity. I think this is a factor in it because it takes steps unlike other exotics that you can just buy off a wall. I have a lot to say one day about the Witch Queen as a year in general, but let's just say I'm hopeful for some major changes to Destiny's sandbox. And Divinity is one that I think is getting its bell rung for better or worse. From a great exotic quest to an exotic that is a utility more than a weapon, Divinity, the best and worst exotic of all time, the exotic to divide a whole community. Thanks for watching.